We're at the Brandywine River Museum in Chadds Pennsylvania. I'm here today with Amanda Burden. She is curator of the upcoming Jamie Wyeth retrospective. Amanda, how did the idea for the show come about?
Well, you know, the idea has been in the works for probably longer than you think, at least 5 years in the planning. And it was originated by the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and their curator, Elliot Bostwick Davis, was interested in looking into a living artist that hadn't received a retrospective, and Jamie Wyeth was someone of interest to her. Of course, Jamie is someone we're all familiar with here and know very well, but there's a new aspect to his work in the Boston Museum, so she began the research many years ago and compiled an excellent book and catalog and this traveling exhibition to go along with it.
Very good. And this show opens to the public next Friday, January 17th. It'll be on display here at the museum until April. And how many works are in the show?
Well, it's kind of a number that's in flux from day to day because I keep adding more. About 110 works you'll see, and that will range from drawings that Jamie made when he was just a boy, 3 years old, some of the youngest, and all the way up to things that were made in 2013 and 2014, and finished paintings, sketches, postal stamps, these new sculptural works he's been doing, which are going to be quite a surprise for people, I think.
Sounds like a lot of fun. I understand Mr. Wyeth has a studio in the Chadds area, and he also works in Maine.
Yes, that's true.
What does he think about the idea about the show?
Well, I think if you ask him, and I have, he's a little trepidatious about what it might look like, and it's like going into a room of all your past friends, but you know, you see, as he says, sometimes he sees the mistakes glaring out at him a little more than the successes. So, you know, for any artist to be living at the time of their retrospective, it's a momentous occasion, and whether all of the reunitings are joyous for him is a different animal. You know, he sees sometimes the wrong turns he took or the mistakes, and it's a growing experience for an artist. Yeah.
And the Brandywine Museum has been open since 1971, and I guess this painting behind us has been with the museum almost from the start.
This is a painting called Portrait of Pig from 1970, and it's a style and a phase of Jamie's work that is showing a transition from his very meticulous, measured, portrait-like paintings of animals, and he's just starting to get into the little expressive nature of, you see the different hairs on the pig and the kind of joy and abandon that he takes in the straw around the pen here, and you get a little expression on the face of the pig's name is Den Den, and so this has been a bit of an icon here at the museum for a long time. It will find companions in the retrospective with other large animal paintings. There's one of a sheep called Portrait of Lady, a large raven, and also a ram as well in giant scale. And these are paintings that Andy Warhol looked at and said, oh, Jamie's getting a little pop because it's large scale.
And the subjects of the farm animals and the ravens and the cats and the sheep, they're all part of the Wyeth family, I guess.
Absolutely. You know, when you mentioned the studio that he has in the Chadds area, that's part of the Wyeth tradition as well, because his father and his grandfather also had studios here, and his father and grandfather's studios are part of our historic properties here at the museum. But what I think people probably don't know is that his father's studio, operated by the museum now, actually is Jamie's first studio as well. A small area of that was sort of carved out for Jamie to work in as a young man, and he particularly did his portrait of John F. Kennedy there. So we'll be highlighting that as part of our special tours to go along with the retrospective.
So visitors to the museum can take a separate tour to the Andrew Wyeth studio?
Yes, there'll be several special occasions where you'll be able to go and visit the Andrew Wyeth studio, which is also Jamie's, and the N.C. Wyeth studio, which is where Jamie really was trained by his Aunt Carolyn Wyeth, who was also an artist. After his grandfather passed, Carolyn worked there in that studio and often held classes, Jamie among her students, and so we'll be restaging that to reflect the era when Jamie would have worked there.
Very good. And can you tell us a little bit about Howard Pyle and the Brandywine tradition of illustrators?
Absolutely. You know, one of the reasons we're located here and one of the reasons that the Wyeths came here is because Howard Pyle, this renowned illustrator of the golden age of American illustration, had a studio in Wilmington and a summer school in Chadds Ford. And N.C. Wyeth, Jamie's grandfather, was a student of Howard Pyle and followed him here to Chadds Ford and settled here, really. He was a native of Massachusetts. And that explains also the Wyeth's connection to New England, because they would always still spend time in New England with the family homestead here in Chadds Ford.
And Jamie also lives and paints part of the year up in Maine, I guess in Tennant's Harbor and on Monhegan Island.
Monhegan Island and Southern Island. And you'll see views of both of those homes he has in the retrospective as well. The studio he uses, or the home he uses on Monhegan Island, was once owned by Rockwell Kent, the painter. And his home is pictured in a painting that Jamie has done, as well as a portrait, an imagined portrait of Rockwell Kent that Jamie's done. So it's an artist that he has a connection to in terms of influence. He lives in the man's house. But the other studio is on Southern Island, which has a lighthouse. And you'll see that lighthouse in many of Jamie's paintings. It's his own private space, unlike Monhegan, which is populated by other islanders. And the world of Southern Island is sort of the world of Jamie Wyeth's paintings, really.
And I guess his whole life is going to come to life through the art on these walls. It's going to be kind of an emotional time for him and Wyeth family members to walk back through the decades and see his life and soul on display.
Yeah, I was just speaking to a family member the other day, and we were looking at a particular painting that's going to be in the exhibition. And I was talking about what I was placing it next to and you know, just basic things like that. And he suddenly said, I remember the day Jamie painted that. It was our first trip to Monhegan Island, and we were busy doing something, and Jamie was sketching and sketching, and this is the work that came out of it. So those kind of local family memories are embedded in the paintings as well, even if it is you know, a painting that we just love and appreciate for what it looks like. It's filled with Wyeth family memories as well.
I'm sure there's a story behind every painting. And as the show came together, what surprised you and your staff as you saw putting the pieces of a puzzle together? What was that like?
Well, I think one of the surprising things was the tableaux vivants, which are the sculptural works that we're going to see. Jamie Wyeth has been using these small scale, they're 1/6 life scale models of a couple of locations from his life in the 1970s in New York, particularly Andy Warhol's factory studio. And you're going to see small scale reproductions of those places in his past that he uses as aids to memory. One of the things you'll see is that Jamie doesn't abandon a subject, or he may come back to it decades later and continue and pick up. And his paintings of Andy Warhol are one of those where you see works from the 70s. We'll have a life-size sketch that Jamie made of Andy Warhol, but we also have works just from the last 2 years where he's still painting Andy Warhol from those detailed sketches and aids of memory he has. There's another work that I think is surprising, and a story that hasn't maybe fully been told yet. There's a painting called Berg and another called Ice Flow that have an unusual perspective of the sea outside Monhegan Island, because Jamie has had an experience where he was thrown from a boat in the icy waters. And these couple of paintings recall this near-death experience that he had there. And they're just, to me, some of the most beautiful new works that he's produced. And I'm so glad to have them here in the show.
That's interesting. How old was Mr. Wyeth when the accident
happened? It was only just very recently. So these are new paintings as well. And they've got beautiful colors and golden sun and this deep turquoise sea that turns kind of menacing when you hear the story that goes with it. And so that's a new personal aspect of his work as well.
Very good. Let me ask you something else about the frames that we're going to see on these works. Edgar Degas once said that the frame of a painting is the ultimate reward for an artist, but then on the other hand, Mark Rothko said that frames were like coffins for artists. And I wonder how the Wyeths feel about the frames that adorn the art.
You know, it's a very interesting question. We recently had a different show of Jamie's here, and some of the same paintings will be in the retrospective. And I had many questions about the frames because they seemed maybe damaged, you would say. But what we see on the paperwork that comes through, you know, we do careful condition checks. If anything were damaged, it would be recorded. These are recorded as intentionally distressed frames. So there are ones that look pristine and beautiful, and they belong to someone who has chosen to select a different style frame. There are many from Jamie's own collection in this exhibition, and you'll see some of those intentionally distressed and very rustic looking frames. But there's one work in particular called Sea Star, which is a scene of a beach in which Jamie's incorporated sand and seashells and rocks, and that includes around the frame as well. And that one's a particular challenge for anyone handling it. In fact, it's got a special frame built around it that's vacuum sealed to try and protect exactly how Jamie has placed those items on the painting.
Thank you. That's something we'll look forward to. And just to sum up, the show contains over 100 originals. It contains some sculptures, and it contains the tableaus, as you referred to them. I was told that Mr. Wyeth actually used dolls in the modeling of these scenes.
That's true. You know, he took, I don't know if I'm telling secrets here, but he took G.I. Joe figures and reshaped and resculpted faces for them. It was the right scale for the room that he was building. But the rooms themselves are completely fabricated by hand. A woodworker assisted him in doing a beautiful parquet floor. So sculpture is just something we haven't seen from members of the Wyeth family yet before, and it could be a totally new avenue for him in the future.
It seems that he must have a photographic memory to be able to go back to the 70s and his factory experiences with Warhol in New York to recreate this. So.
Well, you know, whether it's photographic or not, Jamie made sure he could remember it. His particular method of sketching and studying is incredibly meticulous in terms of measurements. Everyone he was making portraits of was meticulously measured with calipers, just like a sculptor would do, so that every aspect could be recorded. And when he's back in his studio, he could refer to those notes. Jamie Wyeth was able to measure every aspect of that machine so that he can reproduce works later, decades, and even posthumously, that still are so accurate and portrait-like of the dancer.
So instead of photographic reference, Wyeth worked almost like a surveyor or an architect with measurements and notes and details.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. You know, you don't find photographic reference in his materials. One of the other treats I think that we're going to have here is a newly, I don't know if we'll say discovered, but a newly retrieved sketchbook from his days studying anatomy at the Columbia Medical School morgue. And he has very graphic at times dissection imagery, skulls and tendons and that sort of thing. And that's one of the additions here to this exhibition. And I think it just will give that window into the basic nature of building up from the bones through the tendons to the flesh of the bodies that goes into making them so lifelike.
I understand the artist actually studied side by side in a New York hospital morgue to get hands-on experience with anatomy.
It is, and that doctor has come forward and is offered the sketchbook that was left behind as a gift to us. And so we'll be debuting it here in the exhibition. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice to see works and loans come from unexpected sources.
Unexpected places.
Were there any surprises as the show came together? I guess perhaps you and the staff started this idea with a preconception about this is what the artist does, and we know Draft Age, we know Den Den, we know the chickens, the seagulls, but what hit you as a surprise, and what would you like to tell the public that may be a surprise to them?
Well, I think just being able to view 6 decades of an artist's work, and Jamie Wyeth's work is a particular treat in this respect because we see how he starts from a child and that precocious, talent that he showed. What's surprising is that by the time he's a teenager, 14, 15, 16, the works that he is creating are so absolutely just crystalline portraits that look like 17th century Dutch masters. And, this
Portrait of Shorty.
Yeah, portrait of Shorty. There's a portrait of his own father in that vein. And Dr. Helen Tausig is one that'll be a treat here. Those paintings would be the high point of another artist's career after a lifetime of work and training, and Jamie Wyeth accomplished them as a teenager. And then there's sort of the question of where do you go from there? And what's beautiful about his work is he did not maintain or restrain himself to that one style. He tried other styles, he experimented, he visited Andy Warhol in the factory and learned from him. He branched out and he used his talents in anatomy for other aspects, and these very expressive portraits and late works that are very dreamlike and almost, if we think of the Wyeths often as realists, Jamie Wyeth is turning towards surrealist almost towards the end here in painting some dreams he's had recently of his father and his grandfather. And so we'll see 3 examples of that painting that just is a recurring dream and recurring painting as well in his work. So the progress of his career from child prodigy, really, in the virtuoso moments of his teen life, to full-blown, confident, expressive artist as an adult. Yeah.
Sounds like a lot to look at, and I guess the exhibit catalog is probably worth a good read. And
it's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. All of the work is pictured in it with wonderful essays by Elliot Bostwick Davis and John Huston that help to situate Jamie Wyeth in the context of American art, but also for those who aren't, like we are in Chad's Ford, so very familiar with all aspects of his history, his life, and his family. It brings everyone who can appreciate, an American artist up to speed on how Jamie's career developed. So it's a beautiful book as well.
And once the show closes in Chad's Ford at the end of April, where does it go from here?
Yeah, it has 2 remaining venues. San Antonio, Texas, which is going to be very different from a situation here in Chad's Ford where so many of our members and our guests and our visitors are already ready to see a Wyeth work when they come in, and San Antonio will be new. And after that, it will travel to Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas, and which is one of the major museums of American art, and it's a very recent construction, and so it's a bit of an honor. And when it's there on view, there'll be a companion exhibition on view of Andy Warhol's work as well. Warhol is such an influence through the 70s on Jamie Wyeth's work. It's a nice comparison to see the 2 together.
Wonderful. Well, this sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our viewers in Lancaster and people in the Pennsylvania and Delaware area. Amanda, thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing the rest of the show today. And is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, I think just take the time to come down to Chad's Ford. And if you can, get those special tour tickets, because you'll never see our historic properties in the same way again. With an emphasis on Jamie Wyeth's perspective there. And that's something you wouldn't experience at any other museum either, not in Boston or San Antonio, because it's something very special to our hometown audience.
Thank you very much. For LCTV, I'm Bob LeMin here at the Brandywine River Museum. And we're behind the scenes here at Brandywine River Museum, looking at some works that will be in the upcoming James Wyeth retrospective. I'm here with curator Amanda Burden. And Amanda, tell us what we're looking at this morning.
So I've picked out a few works that are only going to be seen here at the Brandywine venue. The first one we're looking at is called The First Study for Draft Age. Draft Age is a painting that many people know as kind of a Marlon Brando-esque figure in a leather jacket. But what people don't know is that the first version of it, it was a totally different era, almost more, I would think, something from his grandfather's era, this flying ace with his aviator jacket on, and So the painting came a long way in a short time until the final portrait was made. And I think that had to do with things that were going on in current events and in Jamie Wyeth's life, and with, switching over from the old-time version of a sort of afternoon matinee hero to a contemporary 1960s version of a matinee hero, which would be sort of more leather-clad.
Draft Age is indeed one of Mr. Wyeth's signature works from the 60s. It shows his good friend and Chadsford native James Lynch posing in motorcycle regalia, and it's considered really one of his top works of the 60s. It's a great addition for the show. And we're going to take a look at another painting. Over here, it looks like Andy Warhol on the rocks.
You're right. You're right. What we have here is actually an Andy Warhol portrait that's done well after Andy Warhol's death. This painting is called Voyeur, and it's from 2012, which, Jamie Wyeth was friends with and companions with Warhol in the 1970s and made some of those meticulous studies and anatomical drawings, which we see he still can access either through his memory or his sketchbooks, to paint this picture of Andy Warhol on the rocks at Monhegan. Now, Warhol never visited Monhegan, so this is a purely imagined and actually related to a dream that Jamie Wyeth had about seeing his father, his grandfather, and Andy Warhol on the rocks of Monhegan. And so there are various versions of that painting, and this goes along with it. He's got his camera in his hand, which is sort of how Warhol is always remembered, as recording the events around him, either with a tape recorder or with a camera. And, Jamie Wyeth is recording the events in his memory in kind of a different way. And here's where we see this more expressive style that has come up in his later works. We're no longer focused on the really meticulous, faithful, virtuoso representation of a portrait. Now, Warhol appears almost ghost-like, wraith-like, in the way that he kind of hovers there on the rocks and is nearly translucent. So not true to life, but true to a dream.
I see. And the Warhol pose in this image reminds me of an earlier Wyeth called Lunch at a Factory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Lunch at the Factory is going to be very reminiscent for you when you see the tableau vivant of the factory dining room that will be in the exhibition. Yeah.
Great, I'm looking forward to that. And taking a look with LCTV, I'm Bob LeMin at Brandywine River Museum. Again, backstage at Brandywine River Museum, we're taking a look and literally going through the stacks. Amanda Burden's going to pull some James Wyeth out of storage. These works are going to be in the upcoming retrospective here at Brandywine.
Great. So we keep these on the rack until we need them, but they're really accessible. So we've got two on this rack from about 10 years apart, just about. This painting here is done when Jamie Wyeth was just 18 years old. It's called Record Player, and it goes along with those early, very detailed portraits that he was known for doing even as a teenager. But this one's a little bit unusual because rather than the portrait, the face, it really concerns the shape and the form of the body of a model that he used frequently named Lester. And so we get the sense of, the hourglass of his figure, the symmetry of the body, and you kind of foretells and foreshadows the interest that Jamie Wyeth is going to take in anatomical studies as well. This is one of these paintings that people refer to as being almost Dutch in their influence. It's very dark, but you can see meticulously painted with every hair on the head represented, and the shadows and the anatomy coming through the drapery on the body as well.
Lester was a friend of the family in Chadsford?
Yes, he's a local Chadsford man, and there are other portraits of him in Jamie's body of work, and there's a note on the back of this particular painting saying, letting us know who it is, telling us this is a portrait of my friend Lester. So in the future, without seeing his face, it might be difficult to tell.
And it is literally a life-size painting of the gentleman. And I see down here we have another Wyeth, another Warhol study.
Yeah, so this is one that would have been done from life. If you can get in there and see it, there are a number of sketches, studies that are done with both dark and highlight that helps to shape out the form or to pull out the form of the body. And of course, Andy Warhol had that really recognizable shock of white hair in his wig, and so it makes for a great highlight in a study like this. Now, this would be from the mid-1970s when he was working with Warhol in the factory, done from life, as opposed to the other one that we looked at, which was done many decades after the fact. We have a number of life studies of Warhol that are going to be in the exhibition, including, as we saw with Record Player, a life-size life study. So, you know, it will seem as if Andy Warhol is standing in the gallery for a moment.
Thanks, Amanda. This has been a wonderful, rare behind-the-scenes look here at Brandywine Museum. Amanda, tell us about the show catalog.
Well, the show catalog it's really gorgeous and absolutely extensive. There are 143 color illustrations, and we have on the cover Kleberg, who's sort of the signature image of the show, one of Jamie Wyeth's own pets, which he often paints. And you see he has a little bit of, you know, a little bit of the Little Rascals in him with that circle painted around the eye of the dog. But it just covers his whole career, section by section, the early years, the New York years, Washington, D.C. years, Brandywine and Maine as geographic regions he worked in. And you'll get close-up pictures of all the works that are in the show and really great perspective from the catalog's authors as well.
Okay. And Amanda, there's a restaurant and a bookstore here at the museum. I see you have the show catalog. There's lots of items to look at and purchase.
Yeah, you really could make a whole day at the museum here. The exhibition's large. We have the restaurant. But you know, one of the fun things about putting together this exhibition was getting to see the range of Jamie Wyeth images that you can kind of take home with you. And Jamie's such a great storyteller. One of the cool things is to hear quotes from Jamie about his own work. And one of my favorite objects is going to be a coffee mug that's downstairs. And it has a Jamie quote on it that says something like, "Everyone in my family paints except perhaps the dogs." So you see the dogs are a great part of the family as well.
Sounds like a lot of fun. And I see you have some historic photos here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we were thinking about the last time some of these works were in the museum was when the Warhol-Wyeth Portrait Exchange debuted. And in 1976, we actually showed the portrait of Andy Warhol that will be on the display here in the retrospective. And there we have from the opening night, Jamie Wyeth and Andy Warhol in discussion in front of the painting as it was hanging in our galleries. And so there are some great archival aspects to our own work here, and the two of them in front of Andy Warhol's portrait of Jamie in that iconic Warhol style as well.
Did the artists trade portraits? Was that part of the deal? Jamie did a painting and gave it to Andy, and Andy did one of the silkscreen portraits and gave it to
Yeah, it's
Jamie.
one of those traditional portrait exchanges from the history of art. I think of Gauguin and Van Gogh, who did a great portrait exchange as well. And so we're lucky to have versions of each or examples of each. You know, Warhol did multiples, and so the one we're borrowing is one of several he did in that multiple style that Warhol's so well known for, based on a Polaroid photograph. And of course, the portrait that Jamie did of Andy Warhol is in that meticulous, realer-than-life almost stage. One of the wonderful quotes that Jamie recalls when he talks about that experience of painting Warhol is Warhol saying or complaining that he used too much pimple-colored paint to make the portrait. So.
And I recall he also put Andy's dog,
Archie. Yeah.
in the painting.
And you know, we're going to see, I just realized how many times Archie appears in this exhibition. He's in several of the paintings and sketches. So like Wyeth and his trusty friends, Kleberg the dog, Archie was a companion to Warhol as well.
That's a wonderful facet with the Warhol connection, with the James Wyeth exhibit here at the Brandywine River Museum of Art now through April. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.